I'm against the death penalty, not because taking the life of a murderer is always wrong, but because the state has no rightful authority to decide who lives and who dies. A coercive monopoly built on taxation and violence is the last institution we should trust with life and death decisions. From a libertarian perspective, there is no we as a society that possesses the moral authority. There is only the individual aggressor, the victim or the victim's family, and the demands of justice. If someone commits murder and the victim has, perhaps in a will, declared that their killer should be executed, or if the family or legal insurer chosen by the victim during their life exercises that right, then yes, the use of death in response to murder is just. Just as a person may defend themselves with lethal force in the moment, so too may a legal agent impose the death penalty after the fact. Not as vengeance, not by a vote of society, but as rightful restitution. The justification for punishment is derived from the victim's right to self-defense, their self-ownership. At the same time, if the family chooses to forgive the murderer or to demand restitution through non-lethal means, that is their right. If they are Christians of a Tolstoyan or radical pacifist persuasion, they may even choose to forgo restitution entirely. That too is just, because it is their choice to make. It's important to remember that state-imposed punishment today is often justified by vague appeals to rehabilitation or deterrence instead of justice for the victim. Justice must be rooted in principle, not in arbitrary goals that empower the state to inflict punishment without limit. No one can measure how much deterrence is enough, or when someone is truly rehabilitated, but we can determine whether a specific victim's rights were violated and what restitution, if any, is justly owed. The modern state's criminal system doesn't restore justice, it actually compounds injustice. In the case of theft, the government tracks down and prosecutes the thief, not to return the money to the victim or force the thief to work until his debt is paid, but to put the thief in prison. And who pays for this entire process? Again, the victim does, through taxes. First, he loses his property, and then he's forced to fund the apprehension, trial, and long-term imprisonment of the man who robbed him. The criminal escapes the duty of restitution, and the victim is doubly exploited, first by the thief and then by the state. The restitution to the victim should be the focus. As Rothbard in chapter 13 of The Ethics of Liberty wrote, quote, "The idea of primacy for restitution to the victim has great precedence in law. Indeed, it is an ancient principle of law which has been allowed to wither away as the state has aggrandized and monopolized the institution of justice. In medieval Ireland, for example, the king was not the head of state, but rather a crime insurer. If someone committed a crime, the first thing that happened was that the king paid the insurance benefit to the victim, and then proceeded to force the criminal to pay the king in return. Restitution to the victim's insurance company being completely derived from the idea of restitution to the victim. In many parts of colonial America, which were too poor to afford the dubious luxury of prisons, the thief was indentured out by the courts to his victim, there to be forced to work for his victim until his debt was paid. This does not necessarily mean that prisons would disappear in a libertarian society, but they would undoubtedly change drastically, since the major goal would be to force criminals to provide restitutions to their victims." End quote. This is the kind of justice that respects the victim, holds the aggressor accountable in proportion, and refuses to hand the power of punishment to a monopolistic institution divorced from both principle and mercy. So no, we as a society don't get to decide. There is no collective we. There is only the individual, their rights, and the aggressor who violated them.